Hello and welcome to today's edition of SCM Live. One is the loneliest number, or is it? My name is Tim Piotrowski, Social Media and Content Manager at ASCM. Before we begin, I'd like to run through a few details. At the end of the presentation, we will save time for a question and answer session. If you look at the right toolbar on your screen, you'll see a questions box. To ask your question at any time during the presentation, simply type it in the box and click send. If you experience any technical difficulties during today's broadcast, please call GoToWebinar technical support at 1-805-617-7000. This presentation is being recorded and will be emailed to all registrants early next week. In addition, the presentation with the reference links will also be included in the email. And now it's my pleasure to introduce our speaker for today. Patrick Bauer, CPIM, is Senior Director of Supply Chain Planning and Customer Service at Comb Incorporated, a demand planning and S&OP expert. Pat is a self-professed S&OP nerd. He is a frequent speaker and writer, most notably, and serves as co-author of the S&OP section of SCM Now magazine. Welcome, Patrick.
Thank you. I'm very happy to be here today talking to the SCM group. I wrote an article a little over a year ago now talking about what a one-number forecast is, and I titled it "One is the Loneliest Number." And I want to kind of have a mature conversation about one-number forecasting, what it is, what it's not, and potentially what it should be. What I hope to convey today is a bit of a regroup on S&OP, and I want to talk a little bit about what happens when people discuss a single number plan, what are they exactly talking about, and what does that mean. And I have a bit of a slightly different view of a one number plan and what that involves, and some steps to improve, to think differently about one number planning. I'm not sure you can start talking about one number planning unless you dig in a little bit deeper on S&OP or at least talk about S&OP. There's multiple different types of S&OP models. There's really two camps in my mind's eye. There's sort of the Oliver White view of the world. It's that circular graph that you typically see where it has multiple steps, a product management review, a demand review, a supply review, a reconciliation, and an executive meeting. Inside of each of those steps, there's some conversation about a plan. Similarly, the sort of what I'll call the Tom Wallace, Bob Stahl stair-step approach has a data gathering exercise, demand planning process and consensus, supply planning, which is really mostly the balancing process, a pre-S&OP meeting, which is very similar to the reconciliation meeting in the Ollie White model, and an executive S&OP. The idea behind these is that you use all of these process steps or sub-steps to generate a single plan that the organization unifies behind. At least that's what's in common thinking, that's in common parlance. That one number or single number plan is talked about often. It's discussed often at conferences, and people spend an awful lot of time and energy trying to get to it. If I look at S&OP, the very, very basic, most elemental component of it are those 5 meetings I've already talked about. And a portfolio review is a discussion of all product life cycle changes. What it really is talking about is what are your plans around your product life cycle? What are your plans around your product portfolio? Similarly, the demand review is that complete dissection and dissemblement of demand and demand signals to try and figure out what a unified view of the plan is going forward. And going forward is typically considered 12 to 24 months. The supply review is that supply and demand balancing exercise. Can I make a product in the time frame in which it's wanted? And out of that is essentially a supply plan. The pre-S&OP process is a conversation around any mismatches, anything that sort of couldn't work in any of those prior planning exercises, and more importantly, what are the other values that are out there what's the value of the plan? How much is this going to bring from the company from a profitability, from a top line perspective? It is sort of a financial netting of the plan. The executive review is the final of the 5 steps that I view as sort of the go-to S&OP model, and that's alignment, agreement, and go. And the go, again, is around the plan itself. It's the initiation of all the other follow-on planning activities that happen after a plan has been approved. I normally lay out the five different steps in sort of a linear fashion. It's no real different than the stair step or the circular view. It's just a little bit simpler for me visually to see. If I really peel back what S&OP is, it's something much, much, much more complex than just the 5 steps. The 5 steps are boxed off in sort of blue off to the right. You see the portfolio review, the demand review, the supply review, and that pre-S&OP alignment meeting, and the executive review. No different. But what feeds those are a series of other plans. Commercial strategy starts sort of on the top left-hand side, and inside of that there's a route to market plan and a product plan. Here's the products we intend to make. Here's the route to markets we intend to follow. Are we going after a product that serves the drug class of trade, or big box retail, or the dollar class of trade? Those are the conversations that happen inside of most organizations, and they get converted into a demand plan of sort. Here's the item that's selling into this channel at this price. That's a key element and output of those strategic planning processes that end up in the demand planning process. Similarly, supply chain has a whole bunch of strategic plans in place. They have continuity plans. They have improvement plans. They have optimization plans from a network perspective. They have scenario plans that they do what-if analysis on that tend to be a little bit longer reaching. And from there, and the decisions made there, there's distribution and inventory plans, production plans, scheduling plans, purchase plans. There are plans galore. They all get converted into a rough cut capacity plan, and that connects into the supply review. You see that there's just an awful lot of plans in this. In fact, there's a demand plan, a supply plan, a distribution plan, a purchase plan, a rough cut capacity plan, an overhead plan, a budget plan, a continuity plan, and a portfolio plan, at least. Now, this broader and more expansive view of what S&OP is makes you really understand how difficult it is to get a unified vision. You have to do a lot of hard work to get to a unified view. And the reality is that hard work may only have limited value as you move forward. So the single number forecast, the one number forecast, you can use any sort of phrase that's similar to that, is really about trying to get organizational alignment around a single set of plans. If I think I'm going to sell 100 units, that means I'm going to get X number of dollars on top line and bottom line revenues. That's where finance comes in. Supply chain will say, I'm going to produce 150 and I'll leave 50 in inventory because that's a good inventory buffer. You have a supply chain, a production, and an inventory plan. You have manufacturing plans that will reach into the long-term capacity and say, can I or can I not produce 100 on an ongoing basis to meet not just current demand, but future demand. Sales will say, I have a quota of 110, so I have a gap to my quota and my own personal expectations. And marketing will say, if I put on these demand shaping activities, whether it's new media or new promotions or something in the trade, it might leverage me 120 a month. These are the conversations that happen inside of the S&OP process to arrive at a unified plan. And I saw this quote and I really loved it. And it really goes to the heart of why people think one number planning is important. It says, quote, you can't have enough you can have the supply chain building to X, the forecast selling to Y, and the financial folks counting on revenue of Z. It's by Michael Gillen of SAS. I thought it was particularly emblematic of the efforts that people put into getting to a one or a single number plan. So what is a one number plan? Purely definitionally is long stated one of the primary goals of any S&OP process to determine the single number that leaders throughout the organization can accept as the call, the plan, the forecast for the business going forward. And going forward is 12 to 24 months. The plan is a net result of all data gathering, compromising, consensus building, and any modeling that may happen inside of the S&OP process. What it really is a set of single numbers. It's the forecast for an item going forward 12 to 24 months. It's the capacity plan for that same item going forward to 12 to 24 months. And these sets of numbers are used as input into broader aspects of the supply planning process, including rough cut capacity planning. It's used in financial planning, such as FP&A, financial planning and analysis, in brand level profit and loss analyses. And it's really meant to try and achieve this unified singular view of the business. When it's approved by the process team, it's then expressed, it's pushed into the balance of the forecast for further analysis. Most importantly, it's pushed to systems. And it's pushed to systems sort of resides at the top of the supply chain planning stack, the forecast driving inventory plans and distribution plans and all the subsequent plans from there. It's a single number view of the business. It's approved by leadership, and it's used by all functions. There's a lot to be said for having a single number plan. Lots of benefit streams. It kind of seems to be right. And this sort of goes to that. It kind of sort of works. It's intuitive. It makes sense. It provides really accessible direction and alignment. Everyone can draw upon what the plan is and say, yep, that's the plan. There it is. And you know what it is and you know where to find it, and you can draw it down pretty easily. Systems can obviously handle it pretty easy. A single number forecast in any time bucket is fairly easy for most systems to handle. And interestingly, efforts to improve plan quality, especially if they're really strong efforts, generally seem to work. You can make forecasts better through observation and effort. Now, you will eventually hit diminishing returns like most process efforts, but if you really apply yourself, you can get better. You can spend a lot of time root causing to find out why your forecast was off or why your capacity plan was off. You can spend a lot of time in there trying to get better, getting your forecast accuracy up and your schedule attainment up and all the things that drive all the subsequent plans you can try and get better at. You can get better at improving your inventory plan. You can constantly tweak. Generally speaking, it works, and improvement plans work. And the single number is leveraged by all these different groups. There's strategy alignment, and managerial reporting, and gap closing, and accountability, and of course, FP&A. But I have to wonder, does the obsession with a one number focus lead to some form of arrested development? Arrested development being where you're not really leveraging the process enough or the process in a mature enough way. So a one number forecast is kind of an easier answer to a lot of problems. But is the problem really much more complex? So let's have a conversation about the output of this one number plan before I delve in just a touch deeper. On average, 75% of forecasts are adjusted using judgment each cycle. It means if you're making an adjustment, 75% of the time someone's weighing in with some judgment over what the forecast should be. 85% of the time when someone raises the forecast using judgment, they are overly optimistic, making it less accurate. 85% of the time when someone lowers the forecast using judgment is more accurate because they're more conservative. This nets down to 95% of the people who touch the forecast using judgment add virtually no value, and in most cases, they reduce value. So we talk about one number forecasting. We talk about it a lot. We talk about the importance of consensus and judgment being put into these one number forecasts, but most forecasting processes just don't get it right despite the effort. And there's a lot of reasons why they don't get it right. They don't spend the time and the energy underneath it to really ask all the right questions. There are biased processes. There are processes that just are not quantitative. So there's lots of ways to improve a one number forecast, and hundreds of people have written on how to improve your forecast accuracy. That's not what I'm going to talk about right now. I saw this quote and I thought it really stuck to me. One number plan is a simple solution to a complex problem. And I believe that to be true. I'm not the only one who thinks this way. There are other people that think this way, and there's other folks that call the notion of a one number plan naive, mainly because it doesn't account for risk and uncertainty, especially over time, leading to long-term planning issues. And long-term planning issues on the supply side really are at the heart of supply and demand balancing in S&OP. Most of the conversation tends to be around demand, making it overly demand-centric. It's not necessarily a comprehensive view of all the other organizational plans. Most S&OP processes spend way too much time around a demand plan that the prior statistics show not to be all that great. It only has short-term value and quantity. The forecast, as you expand out over time, tends to be less accurate for lots of reasons, including all the dynamics inside the marketplace. It naively, most folks engaging in this one number planning process, naively leverage S&OP as the great plan unifier. And that comes from none other than Dick Ling. And Dick Ling is the father of the expression S&OP. He is essentially the man that invented the process. One number does not quantify or articulate the risks and the opportunities in the plan. It is just a solitary number. There's not a high and a low and then the number. It's typically not expressed as a range. From my perspective, and I don't often put my name in quotes, but from my perspective, it creates this artificial sense of harmony. You're in an organization that says, okay, I have this great one number forecast, and I think it's pretty good. I think it's pretty good quality, but it's just not, for a whole bunch of reasons that we'll get into. And in a much more uncertain world, like the COVID world we're dealing with now, the notion of a single number plan doesn't make a lot of sense. So how do you get a little bit more mature? In my article, I refer to this as having the talk. It's kind of like having a talk with teenagers. It's kind of the next step, the serious conversation you have. One number planning or one number forecasting it just isn't enough. And so how do we get better? So we're all used to seeing range depictions. And this happens to show part of the Eastern Seaboard, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey. And if almost right in the middle there, you'll see a town called Danbury. I live just north of there. And I'm always on that rain, ice, snow line. And in this case, it shows that I'm going to get more snow than the people in, say, White Plains or Bridgeport might get. We're used to seeing these. We're used to seeing a range. It's not you're going to get 5 inches or you're going to get 6 inches of snow. It's 4 to 8 in this case. We're also used to seeing probabilities. And in this case, it's the probability of rain inside of a place where you might live. And so some of them are 10, 20, and 30%. That's what's showing on the map. It could be 100%. I had 100% probability of rain earlier today, and we indeed got 100% rain. So it's very common for us not only to have ranges in the forecasts we see every day, but also the probabilities associated with that. And probabilities come across everywhere, from whether the New England Patriots are going to win another Super Bowl this year, or the potential success of the New York Yankees in winning the American League East. Those probabilities and those estimates are part of our everyday life. Dick Ling, again, the father of S&OP, the person who coined the expression S&OP, refers to a lot of what I've talked about prior as the myth of one number. It says short-term history provides a short-term forward view that is relatively accurate. It operates in a very operational, detailed focus part of the continuum going forward. But as you go forward in time, that the strategic direction and your current view start to depart from each other. So you may call something in the middle based on current trending, which is that red line that sort of crosses in the middle. But it may not have any reality. It could be lower or it could be significantly higher. As you go forward in time, any prediction, any probabilities have much more risk attached to them, much more uncertainty attached to them. And yet we build our S&OP processes around this notion of 12 to 24 forward look with a one number plan with this degree of certainty about the execution and ability to achieve that one number plan. It's sort of a fallacious argument to start out with. It's not really a great place to be thinking and how we should be thinking about S&OP in general. But what you'll see inside of Dick's graph is that he is ranging, no different than the ranging associated with the snowfall index. He's creating a range. There's a range of probable outcomes. So a one number plan really isn't a one number plan, but a series of plans, each addressing one of the potential outcomes. So I was asked about a one number plan at a conference not too long ago, and I said every company has to operate with the idea of a one number plan, but focus really strongly on plan execution. So you use every technique, every tool at your disposal to get to a high quality one number plan. That's a starting point. Then you expand on that to start including ranges, a high and a low, and a target. So you treat your one number plan as your target expectation. But what are the upsides to that? And what are the downsides? Where are your risks and opportunities? And what are the assumptions underneath those risks? And what are the assumptions underneath those opportunities? And then you make sure all plans have ranges. So it's not just a demand plan, but it's a supply plan. What happens if volume increases 20%? How am I going to react to that? What happens if it drops 40%? Am I going to shut down a plant? Am I going to shut down a distribution point? So you start ranging your forecasts. You attach that to the supply plan, and of course, the resultant financial plans attached to all that. And you start determining not just one plan with one monolithic number, but you have a range of numbers and a range of outcomes. So you're better informing the company, that organization that you're working for, of the risks and rewards inside of the business. To that, you add, if you can, probabilities. Build tests around those probabilities that work for your business. So, if Walmart is asking for product detail information like pallet sizing and pallet counts and dimensions of products and things like that, it's probably much more likely that you're going to get that distribution ad at Walmart. Every business has indicators of whether new business in particular or ongoing business is going to close or reclose. And you can, especially on the demand side, you can figure that out. Similarly, on the supply side, you can determine whether the schedules are being attained, whether you're getting planned output, whether you're getting nameplate output. There's a lot of ways in which you can determine the quality of the plans coming out of the supply side of the business and assign relative probabilities to it. If I'm at this place in the learning curve for a new production line, I should reasonably expect X number of days out, X number of weeks out that I will achieve the nameplate capacity that I want to achieve. And then having done all of this, you gap to expectations like crazy. So you set a target line, and then along the way, as you progress, you start gapping to expectations. This is the more mature conversation that companies should be having. I think most of the time when people talk about S&OP, they talk with such fervor around the one number plan, and then they also talk about risk and scenario planning on the longer end, but they sort of miss that middle plan execution piece. I want to make sure I meet my budget this year. I want to make sure that I'm doing a really good job planning my capacity in the next 12 months. 24 months out, that's important too, but how am I going to do this year? How am I going to achieve my plan this year? And that's a lot about what this idea of one number plan is. It's an extension of the concept, just a little bit further. What does it look like when you're doing this? These are examples, and they're bogus examples, but I want to give you what I've seen in my life over time and in my career over time. So there's usually an articulation of opportunities, new product acceptance at a specific big box retailer, and here's how much money it means, and here's the likelihood. In this case, there's probably 100% likelihood because they know something, like they've asked them for some information, or they've asked them for more detailed pricing information. The flip side is that there's risks, a potential delisting at a specific retailer, what that may mean, and the likelihood. It could be a 60% likelihood because we know of competition coming in, or it could be a likelihood because the buyers indicated some negative vibes on some product line that may be in our portfolio. You take this and you call out a total call, and I'm just making up a number. You say, I have a baseline of 3 million units or $3 million with an upside of 1.18. That upside that I can now use on the supply side. If I hear that contextually, I know that I might have extra capacity needs in the future, and the potential for even more. There could be a 700,000 unit upside beyond that. So I have the opportunity to really grow my capacity. I should be, as a supply planner, thinking about that. Now, I may have a whole bunch of uncertainty around the probabilities, and I may not believe those likelihoods, but now I know what they are. I now know my upside. I'm now starting to see the banding upside. And on the downside, in this case, there's a 300,000 unit, a modest probability going down. Dollars going down. So this is sort of that give and take that happens. I have upsides, I have downsides, and I have a plan. When you have a much more mature conversation, it is not a single number plan. It is a layered plan with opportunities and risks articulated. Similarly, you can use your rough cut capacity plan, a key tool in the S&OP toolbox, to ask the question, the normal question, can I make to demand? And then you follow up with, can I make to high-end demand? And what steps might I take if demand drops? There's a lot of companies out there in the COVID timeframe that we're in right now that have had demand drop off the table. So what decisions do you start making around plants and distribution points in the midterm and the near term? How much inventory should I pre-build if I have a seasonal product? Imagine if you're a Snapple or a Pepsi, where your lion's share of your business happens, from May to Labor Day. Think about when people drink an awful lot of soft drinks, when there's a lot of parties and get-togethers. Again, how are you thinking about that now in COVID? But how much inventory should you pre-build in front of that? Because you want to level load your capacity over time. You may want to ask the question, how much slack capacity exists at suppliers, particularly if you're using contract manufacturing. So you want to use that risks and opportunity conversation on the demand side to turn into risks and opportunity planning on the supply side. And of course, if you're one of those organizations that is capacity bound, where capacity is what you sell more than anything else, you may want to start asking the question, do you have any capacity to sell to? So this takes Dick Ling's approach and adds another element. It's that plan execution focus that's in the midterm. It's that conversation, a much more robust conversation about risk rewards. It's hard for me to talk right now about all the things that may happen a year or 18 months from now from a demand side, but I can do a pretty good job in the next year. I can look at all the demand shaping opportunities and marry them up to supply management opportunities and risks and have a much more robust conversation in the midterm. I may still have that range, but at least I've managed to that range much better in a much smarter way. And I leave scenario planning and risk management for that 1 to 3 year out period. But I spend a lot more time and attention. Again, when I look at this slide, a lot of time is spent looking at history, looking in the short-term window. Most companies make more adjustments in the short-term forward window than anywhere else out into the continuum, out into the horizon. This expands the conversation into the midterm and all those activities that are going to make the business work better, will gap close against the operating budget, will sort of help the supply chain perform better in the midterm. So a plan execution focus is that midterm view. It's a midterm that reduces the likelihood that you'll miss budget expectations. It's the constant focus on gaps to plan. And gaps to plan are not just the demand plan or the OB. It's all plans. And in general, sort of working it this way leads to much greater confidence in the planning process because the conversation you have is much chewier to the organization. It seems like you're really digging in more. And the reality is that you're probably digging about the same. You're just focusing your attention at a different time horizon forward. And I think for supply chain folks in particular, it gives supply chain a chance to lead with what I'll call around the corner analysis. Really good supply chain leaders are always looking around the corner. They're not looking at just what's in front of them, but what potential risks go out into the horizon. Unfortunately, we're not provided with all those risks and opportunities in front of us every day. And this will give supply chain a better chance to lead and not be in expedite mode when new demand hits, as an example. In a constrained business, it opens up the conversation about sell-throughs, and obviously any focus on the long term can be linked through to, or the midterm can be linked through to long-term supply chain planning. So it's a different approach, and the recommendation here is to do the one number plan particularly well. It's still very important to the process. It requires the same rigorous analysis, and I think you just have to recognize its relative short-term value. You add in bands and ranges. I love to start with new products first and then move on to base business ranges. Add in tracking tools such as like a point of sale ramp and expectation. Add adjustments based on analysis. Facts sort of drive adjusting from here. And mature the conversation and focus completely and totally on plan attainment. And plan attainment is supply plan attainment, it's capacity plan attainment, it's operating budget attainment. And then you start talking about integrating scenario planning. I think people miss the step in between, the adding and the banding and ranges that will really be helpful both in the short term and the long term planning, both in scenario planning and that midterm planning cycle. I want to talk just a little bit about how all this applies to COVID. For one reason or another, I like this quote, and it's a Donald Rumsfeld quote, and whatever you think about him politically doesn't really matter here. He talks about there are known knowns, and then there are known unknowns, and then there's things that you just really can't know about, and there are unknown unknowns. The one we don't know what we don't know. And COVID's one of those things, we don't know what we don't know. I think most people have experienced something pretty traumatic inside of their lives. I think that the United States experienced, as an example, 9/11. And I saw what that did to foot traffic, as an example, in New York City, and how much that impacted demand. COVID has that same sort of feel to me. Is it exactly the same? No, it's not. For people quarantined, were they told to stay home from work? Not really. They're just in some select parts of New York City mostly. But it feels like that. So do I have an idea that these sort of things can happen and they can really impact the business? For sure. I do know that. But what the reaction is going to be and how long it's going to last and what it's going to look like, to me, mostly that's unknowable. I'd like to look at this in time buckets going forward. So we had COVID, and that hit, and parts of the country are starting to release from quarantine, some more than others. There's still a bit of a shock in the system. There's a tremendous number of people unemployed, some businesses that haven't been able to produce any output, some parts of the supply chain that are more struggling. So I think we're sort of in the continuum that's shown here, somewhere between COVID and shock. And I don't think we know what the impacts are going to be. I know people that are in the sporting good industry that have really seen a tremendous drop in their business, and other businesses like health and beauty, a lot of food businesses, obviously anything associated with cleaner have seen this tremendous uplift in demand. I was watching a documentary on Clorox, and they said that they saw a 500% increase in demand. 500%. So how do you manage capacity around that 500% increase? There's so much in here that we're sort of still in that shock phase. And then what happens from there? You know, a lot of times sort of a dramatic event could lead to a recession, and certainly anything that drives unemployment can lead to a recession, and everyone is promoting a potential recession. Now, what is the impact on that business? I don't know. I think it's really hard to tell because the dynamics of the shocking events haven't really been fully meted out. We don't really know what they're going to be, except we know that there's probably going to be some impact. Can you draw back on what happened in 2008 and 2009? Some cases you probably can. But the business has also changed a lot since then. The presence of an Amazon, as an example, is radically different today than it was 10 years ago. So there's a lot that we don't know. And we don't know what renormalizing is going to be. Are people going to be working from home more often? Has this proven to a lot of organizations that that's a viable alternative, in particular for professional staff? Is there going to be a change in the way we shop? Are we going to move more online than we ever have? I think, is this going to be an impetus to a doubling or a tripling of online purchases? I'll tell you that I know that I've used more online services now than I ever have in the past. So what does renormal look like? I like to break everything down into facts and opinions. So I think for any business, I think every business has some idea what their pre-COVID trends were. I think they can see any observed behavior in their product category. They can see and go back and look at historical performance during a recession, in particular the cohorts and how they participated in the recession. If you have a specific cohort, say men over the age of 50, that buy one product or a product of yours, how did they perform in the last recession? How did they get impacted, and how are they being impacted in this recession? Any changes in trade inventory? There are some people in the trade right now that are absolutely hoarding inventory. And I hear that pretty much from every single peer of mine, that there's a couple retailers out there and e-tailers out there that are gobbling up inventory. They're building trade inventory. Trade inventory tends to come back and depress future shipments at some point in time when it bleeds down. What is that in your business? Have there been any market POS changes? Are people buying less of your product? Have they shifted channels? Are they buying more in the grocery class of trade because people are spending a lot more time in a grocery store versus a big box retailer? Have there been any changes in commercial plans? Have you changed anything in wake of this? Have you preserved money? Have you done anything different inside your business? And I already sort of mentioned channel shifts. These are facts. And for any business, there's probably a ton of facts that you can line up. They're absolutes. The interpretation may vary a little bit, but they are facts. And then you have opinion. How long is it going to last? What are the long-term changes to consumers? I think all of this falls into that realm of crystal ball prognostication with high error associated with it. Depth or duration of recession, midterm impacts, when hoarding behavior will cease, both at the consumer level, at the retailer level, and what the renormal will look like. From a demand planning or a supply chain planning perspective, I'm not sure there's a lot of answers to all of those opinion-based queries. I think you can find inside your business, and I would recommend to anyone that they dig into the facts attached, particularly what's happened in prior economic downturns. And if you can avail yourself of predictive analytics tools and big data tools that integrate together well, you may want to do so. I think that's proven some value for companies that have done that. That's a short story on COVID. The problem with talking about anything COVID right now is we're right in the middle of it. So I don't know where the shock and the recession will end and start, but I feel like part of it we'll start seeing things unfold as we all go back to work, as the country gets turned back on, as it were. And that's all I have for now. Any questions, I'd love to answer any of them.
Yeah, and now is that time for questions. And as a reminder, we ask everybody to look at the right toolbar on your screen, type in your question in the question box, and click send. And I see one coming up right here. I have one question. Why did the concept of a one-number plan become so popular?
Well, I think it was in lower maturity versions of S&OP. S&OP, like any process model, has evolved over time. So I think it became very easy to teach and instruct people to get to a one-number plan. I also think that the integration, about the same time that S&OP sort of matured as a concept, there was an awful lot of systems coming into play. And it was the first computerization of a lot of the planning processes. And it became much easier just to put in a single number and drive MRP off of a single number than a range of numbers. I think it's still difficult for companies to do that to this day.
Okay, I see one more question coming in. The question is, in the COVID-19 world, does it make sense to have a single number plan?
I think more than ever before, you need to think in bands and ranges. Actually, this conversation is immensely timely around COVID because I don't think you can, I think you have to build into your thinking a range of outcomes and what you would do with each set of outcomes. I don't think you can use a single monolithic plan right now. I don't think it's going to be effective to your business. And I don't think it's going to be chewing on the demand data and all those facts that I just talked about well enough. So I would say anything that you learned today, you may want to try and employ.
All right, that's great. We have another one coming in. This person asks, what one indicator would you focus on during the COVID-19 crisis?
I'm not sure that there's one, but I would definitely get as close as you can to the consumer. And 60-70% of the American economy is consumerism based, which means there's an awful lot of consumer packaged goods out there. I would tie yourself and get as close to the consumer as you know it. Most CPG companies have done a tremendous amount of market research. They know their consumer, and I think they have to spend an awful lot of time in the shoes of those given consumers to figure out how they're going to react to what's just happened to us.
All right, one more came in. I have never heard anyone discuss the midterm planning horizon all that much. Is this new?
I'm not sure it's new. It just doesn't get a lot of emphasis. I think Dick Ling will say that ranged and banded forecasts are as important to S&OP as anything else. And I think they add value. I've lived in this world. I've done risk and opportunities forever. And I've been doing S&OP as a functional person or as a consultant for over 25 years. So it's certainly not new. I just don't see a lot of people doing it. It's a level of maturity that people don't tick up to. So, and you know, you go out and look at any classic literature and people sort of obsess on this one number plan. And I think there's value in that. I just don't think it's the best value. You can spend a lot of time and really not help your organization chew down all of the potential risks and opportunities inside of it. And that's really, from my perspective, that's what S&OP is about. It's like serving up those challenges and serving up those opportunities. Hey, listen, if you knew you had extra capacity to sell, that's more top line, that's more bottom line. That's a smart place to be. That's a smart way to think. So making sure you know risks and opportunities and ranging your forecasts and testing them against all your planning parameters just makes good sense. So new or old, I think I'm just bringing it up. It's like one of those adult conversations you have to have. This is a sort of the adult conversation in S&OP. Let's get past just a single number plan. Let's think a little bit smarter than that.
All right, and we have time for one more question. This person asks, how would you plan your operating budget for 2021 post-COVID-19?
I'd flip a coin. I'm not trying to be flippant, no pun intended there, but I'm not sure how you'd plan your operating budget. You know, I've thought a lot about this, and because every company in the next 2 or 3 months is going to begin the process of trying to nail an operating budget for next year. I think you have to look at what's happening month in and month out and do all that fact finding that I talked about in a prior slide. So really dig in there, put some best estimates on some of those opinion-based questions. Maybe bring a Delphi group, a group of people that are really smart, that know your business well, that interpret data well, and bring them together to start talking about what they think the range is going to be. And I think most people's budgets should be a bit of a ranged view. You know, it's current trends, pre-COVID, -10, +2, or something like that. I have a feeling that in some businesses it's going to be less, and it's probably going to be significantly less, because an economy will depress a lot of future consumerism, at least for some amount of time. So again, that's just an opinion, but you have to put that into the lens of your own business and add all of the other pieces and parts, whether it's facts or those learned opinions from folks inside the organization whose opinions you trust. So 2020 is a real coin flip. I'm sorry, 2021 is a real coin flip.
All right, that's all the questions we have time for today. All questions submitted today will be consolidated, answered, and posted on our website. I would like to thank Patrick for his time today. This concludes today's edition of SCM Live. All content and materials included in this edition of SCM Live are the property of ASCM and are protected by the United States and the international copyright laws. All rights are reserved.